When my family's vineyard drowned in debt, they didn't ask for help, they demanded $100,000 from me. The daughter they'd once called a mistake. I was lifting my glass for another toast when I heard my name from the hallway. At first I thought I'd misheard it. But then the voices carried through the half-open door of my father's study. The familiar mix of my brother's eager tone and my parents' quiet authority. "She finally has enough money to help save our family legacy," Dominic said, his voice casual. Confident. Too confident. Then my father's deep baritone followed. "Let's not rush this. Clarissa's always been cautious with her finances. They had Bialakin was merry, when places ride when port not rounds." And finally, my mother's clipped insistence. "The vineyard needs that investment now. Not when she's ready." The words hit harder than I expected, like someone had pulled the floor from under me. The wine glass slipped from my fingers, shattering on the hardwood. Cabernet spread across the floor like blood, our family vineyard's own vintage, soaking into the old oak planks my great-grandfather installed. And in that moment, it hit me, this dinner wasn't a celebration for my promotion at Westbrook Design, it was a setup. They hadn't gathered to honor me, they'd gathered to soften me up. They wanted my money. No. They expected it. I knelt to pick up the shards, my hand shaking as the broken glass caught the light. A small cut opened on my finger. But I barely felt it. My mind was still repeating one phrase over and over. $100,000. That was the exact amount I'd saved over 6 years, every raise, every extra weekend project, every late-night design job, all for one thing. A cabin near Yosemite. I'd dreamed of that cabin since I was 12. Back then, I'd begged Dad to teach me about wine production alongside Dominic. I remember trailing after them toward the fermentation room, notebook in hand. "Clarissa," Dad had called over his shoulder. "Your mother needs help in the kitchen. This is men's work." Like cider. Aranazarge. I'd stood at the window that afternoon, watching the two of them move among the rows of stainless steel tanks. Later that night, Dominic's C- in science earned him ice cream. My own academic award stayed taped to the fridge. Unnoticed. That memory burned as I walked toward the study door. My hands had stopped shaking by the time I turned the knob. 3 heads turned when I entered. My father looked irritated, my brother confused, my mother already rearranging her expression into a polite smile. "What were you just saying about my finances?" I asked. "Clarissa, dear," my mother started, "we're just proud of how well you're doing. That promotion is such an achievement." But for once, the usual anxiety that tied my stomach in knots wasn't there. Instead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. "I know what you were planning," I said, steady. "You've been discussing how to get my money for weeks for Dominic's tasting room." Her smile faltered. Dad's chair creaked as he straightened. "Your brother has put his life into this vineyard. The Matthews name means something in this valley because of his dedication." Dominic leaned casually against the mahogany desk. "This isn't just about me, Clarissa. It's about our legacy. The tasting room could double our revenue. Exli of pro today. Now and of dende." I did the math automatically. 6 years of saving. 6 years of discipline. And now they wanted it all for another of Dominic's visions. "That money's for my cabin," I said. "My future." Mom's lips tightened. "So, you'd put a vacation home above your family?" "It's not a vacation home," I said, my voice calm, firm. "And this isn't about family. It's about bailing out Dominic again." Dad's jaw hardened. "You've always been selfish, Clarissa. Always thinking about yourself instead of what this family has given you." That last line echoed in the room. What this family has given me. Recognition with conditions. Support that always seemed to come with comparison. Love that felt earned, not given. "I'm not giving you my money," I said. "Not 1 cent. Dominic pushed off the desk. "Then maybe you shouldn't consider yourself part of this family's future." It landed exactly the way he wanted. Exclusion. That old familiar threat. But this time, it didn't scare me. The cost of staying in their good graces had finally become too high. "I guess we'll see about that," I said, and turned for the door. Behind me came the sharp intake of my mother's breath, my father's muttered curse. But for the first time in my life, I didn't stop to smooth things over. I just kept walking. The next morning, an email sat waiting on my laptop. The subject line froze me in place. Regarding strategies to secure Clarissa's contribution. It was from my father to our family's financial advisor. My mother and Dominic were copied. "Paul," my father had written, "we need to present this as an opportunity, not a request. Clarissa's always been too cautious with her money, too cautious if you ask me. The promotion puts her in a position to finally contribute to the family legacy. We're thinking $100,000 for a 10% stake." Mom's reply followed underneath. "Remember to emphasize the family aspect. She's always wanted to be included." Then Dominic's addition. "Let's call it Dominic's tasting room in the paperwork. After all, I'm the one keeping this place going while she's busy building her little career. My hands shook as I scrolled through weeks of messages. They'd planned this. Not days, months. Waiting for the perfect time to strike. When my promotion made me financially viable. Not a daughter, not a sister, just a resource. I printed everything. Slid the pages into a folder evidence. The next morning, I parked across the street from Hartwell & Sons, our family's law firm. Through the glass window, I saw them, my parents, Dominic, and Aunt Martha gathered around a massive oak table. The investment documents were neatly centered in front of an empty chair. My chair. I didn't go inside. Instead, I called the office from my car. "This is Clarissa Matthews," I said when they answered. "I'll be joining by phone." A faint shuffle, then my mother's voice over speaker. "Clarissa, darling, don't be ridiculous. Come inside. I'd prefer some distance for this conversation," I said. Roger Hartwell, our lawyer, cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the investment opportunity in Matthews Family Vineyards, specifically the expansion project for Dominic's tasting room." "Yes," I said. "I've seen the emails." Silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. "Those were private communications," my father finally said, voice tight. "About me," I said. "Without me. How many other family members have you approached for money?" More silent. Then Aunt Martha spoke, her voice small. "They got $50,000 from me last year for new fermentation equipment. But it was never purchased." "That was different." Dominic cut in quickly. "Unexpected costs with irrigation. Like the wine club 3 years ago?" Aunt Martha asked softly. "Or the online store before that?" Through the window, I saw his face redden. My phone buzzed, new texts rolling in. "Uncle Robert. Don't let them pressure you. Cousin Stephanie. Are you going to do your part for the family legacy? Grandmother's nurse. Your grandmother hopes you'll consider what family unity means to her at her age." The subtext was clear. Refusal meant exile. It meant losing them all. And yet, for the first time, I wondered if that might be better than losing myself. I looked at the vineyard beyond the street, the same one I'd once dreamed of being part of, and whispered into the phone, "I need to go." "Clarissa," my mother started, but I hung up. At work, I threw myself into designs, into numbers, into anything but family. Still, my boss Elaine noticed. "You okay?" she asked, pausing by my desk, her eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Family stuff," I said with a half smile. She noticed the cabin listing half hidden under my papers. "That the property you've been saving for?" "Yeah. But now my family wants me to invest in my brother's vineyard expansion instead." Elaine leaned on my desk, thoughtful. "You know, when I recommended you for promotion, there were 3 other candidates. You weren't the most senior. But you were the most deserving." She tapped one of my blueprints. "You earned this, Clarissa. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Something in my chest loosened just a little. That night, driving home, I kept asking myself the same question. Is protecting my future worth losing my family? Or has it always been the price of finally being free? The next day, the world decided for me. It started with a Facebook notification. Dominic's latest post. A beautiful shot of the vineyard at sunset. The caption read, "Family support makes dreams come true. Excited to announce expansion plans for Matthews Vineyard. Number family legacy. Number vineyard life." The comments flooded in immediately. "Cousin Melissa. So proud of you, carrying on the Matthews tradition." "Aunt Joanne. A good sister always supports her brother." "Uncle Stephen. Can't wait to see the tasting room with your name on it." My name. He'd used me again, without my consent. Without my money. He'd already told the world I was part of it. I closed Facebook before I said something I couldn't take back, and that's when the office phone rang. "Clarissa. It's your mother," came the voice I dreaded. "I'm at work, Mom. This will only take a minute," she said smoothly. "Your father and I are hosting a family reunion next weekend. Dominic will present his expansion vision. We expect you there, of course. Not a request, a summons. I'll have to check my schedule. Family comes first, Clarissa. Saturday at 4. Then she hung up. I stared at the phone, my pulse hammering. They were escalating, turning manipulation into spectacle. They weren't inviting me. They were cornering me. And somewhere deep down, I knew. This time, I wouldn't let them. The calls started the next afternoon. I was sketching revisions for the Peterson project when my phone buzzed once, then again. The number flashed an area code from home. I let it go to voicemail. When the same number called twice more, I silenced my phone completely. But that evening, curiosity or dread got the better of me. I pressed play. The first message was from my bank. "Miss Matthews," said a hesitant male voice. "This is Mike Belton from Sierra Mortgage. We need to discuss your pre-approval for the Yosemite property. Some concerns have been raised about your financial commitments. Please call me back." Concerns? My heart sank. The second message made everything clear. "Clarissa, it's Robert. My uncle's familiar drawl began. Just had a nice chat with Mike Belton. We go way back. I mentioned you might be overextending yourself with that cabin idea while the family business needs support. Call me, okay? I sat frozen on the couch. They weren't just pressuring me anymore, they were sabotaging me. My own family had interfered with my mortgage. That night, I moved on instinct. I screenshotted everything: Dominic's post, my mother's call log, the bank voicemails. I sent an email to my lender requesting all future communications in writing. Password protected. Then I changed every password I had: banking, email, social media. I called the credit bureaus to flag my accounts for fraud alerts. By midnight, my dining table was covered in paperwork, savings statements, property listings, loan documents, spread like armor. I wasn't just protecting my money anymore, I was protecting myself. An hour later, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something, maybe exhaustion, maybe defiance, made me answer. Clarissa. It's Sandra, came the bright voice of my real estate agent. I have amazing news. For the first time all week, I felt my pulse ease. The Oakhurst property we discussed? The owners just dropped the price by 15%. 3 acres, mountain views, 10 minutes from the park entrance. It's perfect for you. Is it still within my budget? With the new price? Absolutely. Sandra chuckled softly. And get this, locals call that ridge, Independent Ridge. Fitting, isn't it? I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. That's perfect. There, see what it doing of the proof. Wanting. Sometimes, the universe has a sense of humor. I agreed to see it that weekend. When we hung up, I walked to the window. The city lights below blurred into a shimmer, but in my mind, I saw something else. The dark silhouette of pine trees, the clean silence of a mountain night. A place that belonged solely to me. Then the doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock, nearly 1 in the morning. My stomach tightened as I walked to the door. Through the peephole, I saw her, my mother, standing in the hallway, clutching a wine bottle. I opened the door. Mom? She smiled that familiar brittle smile and stepped inside, holding out the bottle like an offering. Matthews Reserve Cabernet, 1989, she said. From the year you were born. We've been saving it for a special occasion. The bottle gleamed dark red beneath the kitchen light. The family crest embossed on the label, the crest that never felt like it belonged to me. She set it on my counter. This is just the beginning of what you'll receive if you invest in the family. A case of reserve wines every year. Your name on a plaque in the tasting room. Your children's future secured. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't love. This was a bribe. My future isn't for sale, I said quietly. Her smile faltered. Don't be dramatic, Clarissa. This is about legacy. It's fire den way. No, I said. It's about Dominic. It always has been. We've always supported both our children equally. The lie hung in the air, heavy and obvious. 3 decades of memories flashed in my mind, achievements ignored, promotions dismissed, quiet sacrifices unnoticed. I think you should leave, I said. She reached for the bottle, but I covered her hand with mine. Leave the wine, I said. I might need it while I sign the papers for my cabin. For the first time, she looked at me as if she didn't recognize the daughter standing in front of her. Then she turned and walked out. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. The apartment was silent, but the kind of silence that feels clean, the kind that comes after you finally stop apologizing. The next morning, I found James at the office coffee machine. Hey, he said. You look like you didn't sleep. Didn't, I said. And then, before I could stop myself, I told him everything. The vineyard, the emails, the sabotage, even the midnight visit. James didn't interrupt once. He just listened, then said, you need to write them an email, formal, professional, and airtight. Family boundaries, financial independence, everything. I'll help. For the next hour, we drafted it together. No emotion, no explanations, just clarity. To my family, I am not making any financial contributions to the vineyard project. My savings and investments are my own, and I expect that boundary to be respected. Any further attempts to access my accounts, influence my financial decisions, or contact my lenders will be treated as interference and reported accordingly. I hope our relationship can continue on personal, not financial terms. Clarissa. When I hit send, something lifted off my chest. That's what friends do, James said softly when I thanked him. And maybe that's why, when I called Sandra later that day to confirm my cabin viewing, I scheduled it for the exact same time as the family reunion. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, not Matthews Reserve, but something simple from the corner store, and opened my laptop. On one side of the screen, I built a spreadsheet comparing the vineyard's returns against property investments in the Yosemite area. On the other, I added notes, appreciation rate, rental income, Maintenance costs. The numbers didn't lie. The vineyard was bleeding money. The cabin was an investment in freedom. Halfway through my calculations, the phone rang again. Miss Matthews? This is Eliza Cooper from First Sierra Bank. I understand you've been working with Mountainside Financial on your cabin purchase. I wanted to offer you a better deal. We specialize in vacation properties in the Yosemite area. Better rates, lower fees, cleaner terms. The timing was uncanny, almost poetic. When the call ended, I stared at my spreadsheet and smiled. The universe wasn't subtle anymore. It was pushing me forward. Saturday arrived warm and cloudless, the kind of day my father used to call harvest perfect. But I wasn't driving toward the vineyard. I was heading for the mountains. The road curved upward through pine forest. Sunlight filtering through the trees like something sacred. Sandra met me by a small gate marked Independent Ridge. The property took my breath away, 3 acres of golden grass and dark pines, with a tiny A-frame cabin perched above the valley. The mountain stood like a promise behind it. I walked through the empty rooms, light wood floors, stone fireplace, tall windows facing the sunrise. It didn't smell of wine or earth or oak barrels. It smelled like possibility. Sandra handed me the paperwork. I didn't hesitate. When I signed my name, the pen didn't shake. That evening, I drove straight from the mountains to the vineyard. The long gravel driveway wound between the vines, green rows that once felt like belonging, but now looked like history. Through the tasting room window, I saw them already gathered. My parents, Dominic, Aunt Martha, Uncle Robert, the family lawyer. A stack of LLC documents waited neatly at the end of the table in front of an empty chair, my chair. I parked, smoothed my jacket, and reached for my briefcase. Inside were 3 things. My cabin's purchase documents, the vineyard's financial reports, and a folder labeled evidence. It was time to stop being their silent daughter. I walked into the tasting room. The air smelled like oak and tension. Thank you all for inviting me, I said evenly. Before they could speak, I opened the folder and laid out a set of reports, each neatly highlighted in yellow. For the past 10 years, the vineyard has operated at a profit margin below 2%, far below industry standard. In 2019, there was a loss of $35,000. In 2021, during record tourism, profits were $12,000. That's less than half a single employee's annual salary. The room went quiet. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom's smile strained. And yet, I continued, this year's projections claim a 30% increase in profit with no explanation for the turnaround. Dominic's voice cut in, sharp and defensive. You've never cared about the family legacy. You don't understand what it takes to run a vineyard. You just sit in your fancy office drawing buildings. For a second, I almost laughed. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. Actually, I recall Clarissa trying to learn about vineyard operations when she was younger. Aunt Martha nodded. She asked about bookkeeping too. Wanted to help with the business side. I was told it wasn't my place, I said quietly. That Dominic would handle it. Mom leaned forward. That was years ago. This is about family loyalty now. Is it loyalty? I asked. To pour money into a business that's never been profitable, one I was never allowed to be part of? No one answered. Then Grandmother Helen's voice, soft, tremulous, broke the silence. Would you consider a smaller investment, dear? Just to keep peace in the family? I hesitated. For a heartbeat, I wanted to say yes, anything to make her smile. But peace bought with silence isn't peace. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Elaine's name appeared. I excused myself and answered. Clarissa, she said crisply. Sorry to interrupt your family gathering, but we have an emergency. The Westridge client needs immediate revisions for Monday's presentation. We'd planned this call as a lifeline. Understood, I said. I'll be right there. When I turned back, all eyes were on me. Suspicion, disappointment, anger. I'm sorry, I said. Work emergency. I have to go. This is more important than your job, Dad said. No, I replied quietly. It isn't. I gathered my papers, nodded once to my grandmother, and walked out. For the first time, no one followed me, and as I stepped outside into the late afternoon light, I knew I hadn't just escaped a meeting. I'd escaped a lifetime of being expected to stay. The following Saturday dawned clear and cold. The kind of crisp morning that always used to make my father proud. He would walk the rows of vines, arms behind his back, humming old Sinatra songs and saying things like, "You can feel the legacy in the soil." But that morning, as I drove toward the vineyard gates, all I could feel was the tightness in my chest. A week had passed since the confrontation. No one in my family had called or texted. The silence wasn't peace, it was the calm before another storm, and I was driving straight into it. The iron gates creaked open, revealing the familiar gravel driveway lined with grapevines just starting to brown in the autumn chill. My tires crunched over the stones, each rotation a countdown. When the tasting room came into view, I spotted the lineup immediately. My father's dark sedan, my mother's blue SUV, Dominic's truck, Aunt Martha's aging Mercedes. They were already here. Waiting. Dad rose from his chair as I stepped through the tasting room door. His expression rehearsed, a smile stretched too tight, eyes too sharp. "Clarissa," he said warmly. "We're glad you could make it." Mom fussed with a tray of cheese and crackers on the table, not meeting my gaze. Dominic stood by the window, his vineyard-branded polo crisp and spotless, arms folded. "We thought it might be nice to have breakfast before the rest of the family arrives," Dad said. I set my leather portfolio on the table but didn't sit. "I'm not hungry." Dominic turned from the window, his smile easy, the kind of practiced charm that always seemed to work on everyone but me. "We've been talking, Clarissa. We've come up with something special, a family arrangement." Mom nodded quickly, eager. "Yes. We know how important your independence is to you, dear, so we've adjusted our offer." Dad slid a folder toward me. "Instead of 10% ownership for your investment, we're offering 15. An exclusive deal, no one else in the family gets these terms," he said. I flipped open the folder. The paper inside smelled faintly of ink and arrogance. 15%. I repeated, voice flat. "That's a 50% increase in your stake," Dominic said smoothly, as though generosity erased history. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." My father leaned forward, fingers steepled. $100,000 for 15% ownership in a vineyard that's been in our family for 4 generations. Your great-grandfather would be proud to see you stepping up. Mom reached out, touching my wrist. "Family supporting family, darling." Her fingers were cool, delicate, but the weight of her words was heavy. They were still trying to dress coercion in sentimentality. I closed the folder slowly. "I've already invested my money." The words landed like a dropped glass. Mom blinked. "What do you mean?" Dominic took 2 quick steps forward. "Invested in what?" I unzipped my portfolio and laid 3 photographs on the table, each one perfectly centered on the smooth oak surface. The first, a rustic A-frame cabin framed by pine trees. The second, a sweeping mountain view with clouds rolling like silver mist. The third, the deed, my name printed clean and bold across the bottom. "I bought a cabin in Oakhurst last week," I said. 2 acres, views of Yosemite. Mom's hand trembled over the photos. "You bought property without telling us?" "Just like you discussed my finances without telling me," I said. "I invested in my own legacy, one I built myself." Dad's face flushed. "This is incredibly selfish, Clarissa." "No," I said, meeting his gaze. "It's self-preservation. Dominic's had every advantage, and he's still asking for more." Before the words could settle, the tasting room door opened. Uncle Robert, Aunt Judith, and Grandmother Helen stepped inside, followed by a few cousins balancing trays of food. Perfect timing. Dominic's jaw clenched. "We're not done discussing this," he hissed under his breath. "Actually," I said, raising my voice just enough for the room to hear. "We are." There's not saved to the tenser. As the family gathered around the table, I took a breath, steady, deliberate, and stepped into the space where my father normally stood when he made vineyard speeches. "Before we begin today's reunion," I said, "I'd like to share something important about the expansion project." Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks froze mid-air. I opened my laptop and connected it to the tasting room's display. The vineyard's financial charts filled the wall, profit lines slumping like wilted vines. "I've reviewed the vineyard's performance for the past decade," I began. "For 10 years, we've operated at a profit margin below 2%. In 2019, there was a loss of $35,000. In 2021, profits barely reached $12,000. Even with record tourism." I could feel the shift in the air, disbelief mixed with quiet anger. "And yet," I continued, clicking to the next slide, "this year's projections claim a 30% increase without any supporting documentation." Uncle Robert leaned in, squinting. "So the tasting room wouldn't solve this?" "Not without 5 investors at $100,000 each," I said. "Even then, profitability wouldn't happen for at least 5 years. A few murmurs rippled through the room. Dominic's voice rose, sharp and indignant. "Her numbers are wrong. She doesn't understand this business." I looked at him evenly. "Which numbers, exactly? The overhead costs you provided to the bank last quarter, or the projections you shared with investors last month?" His mouth opened, then closed. He knew I'd seen the same records. "These figures contradict each other," I continued calmly. "Either the vineyard is struggling more than you've admitted or you've misrepresented it to the bank." A collective murmur spread. Aunt Martha exchanged a long, slow glance with Uncle Robert. "Maybe it's time we bring in a professional manager," Uncle Robert said, removing his glasses. "Before we ask for more family money." Dominic paled. "You can't be serious." But Robert's voice was steady. "I am." Mom's hand flew to her chest. "Robert, don't overreact." "I'm not," he said. "I'm looking at the numbers. The tension in the room thickened until even the air seemed heavy. Then I caught sight of my grandmother at the far end of the table. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes, sharp despite her years, met mine, and then she nodded, small, but unmistakable. By evening, word had spread. As I drove back to my condo, my phone buzzed, non-stop texts, emails, notifications. Apparently, 3 of Dominic's potential investors had already withdrawn after hearing about the financial inconsistencies. My parents hadn't called. Dominic hadn't texted. The silence this time felt different. It wasn't avoidance. It was defeat. When my phone finally chimed at midnight, I didn't expect it to be him, but it was. Dominic. We need to talk privately. I have a new proposal. I stared at the message for a long time, the phone screen glowing pale in the dark. A week ago, that message would have filled me with guilt or curiosity. Now, it only brought a strange calm. I placed the phone face down on my nightstand and turned off the light. Whatever his new proposal was, I'd face it on my terms. For the first time in my life, that was enough. The next morning, sunlight spilled through my blinds. For a while, I just lay there listening to the city wake up, to the muffled hum of life outside my window. I thought about my family, the vineyard, the years I'd spent trying to earn what Dominic received by default, and I realized something simple. Almost embarrassingly simple. Freedom doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes, it comes quietly when you stop explaining yourself. I got up, poured coffee, and opened my laptop. At the top of my to-do list was a single line I'd typed the night before. Bolded in clean, simple text. Independent Ridge Foundation Planning. The morning after the reunion, I woke up to quiet. Not the kind of uneasy silence that filled my childhood home after arguments, the kind that made you tiptoe and hold your breath. This silence was peaceful, earned, and almost golden in the early light. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen face down. I hadn't touched it all night, even though I'd seen Dominic's text flash before I fell asleep. We need to talk privately. I have a new proposal. There was a time I would have responded instantly, not because I wanted to, but because I'd been trained to. Trained to smooth things over, to protect the illusion of family harmony, but not anymore. I brewed coffee, opened my curtains, and let the morning pour in. The city was alive, sunlight catching on glass towers, the low hum of traffic below. A world that didn't know my last name or care about vineyard legacies. And for once, that anonymity felt like freedom. By mid-morning, I'd opened my laptop and stared at the folder marked Independent Ridge. Inside were the cabin's documents, the deed, the inspection report, the property map, and one crisp new file titled Blueprints. I smiled at the blank page. For years, I'd designed buildings for other people, clients with visions I had to interpret and refine. But this one was mine. I wanted a space that didn't apologize for its simplicity. Wide windows facing the mountains, a wraparound deck for morning coffee, a studio upstairs where I could sketch and breathe. A home that didn't echo with old voices or debts disguised as love. As I began sketching the first lines, a small email notification appeared in the corner of my screen. Subject: Clarissa, we need to talk. In another she was waiter. In no nouse of the way. Minus inning. From Dominic Matthews. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, curiosity or maybe closure made me click. I know you're angry. But you didn't have to humiliate me in front of everyone. The vineyard's reputation is at stake, and you've made things worse. Let's talk before it's too late. No apology. No accountability. Just panic. I typed a single sentence in reply. Dominic, transparency isn't humiliation. I hope you find a way forward that doesn't depend on mine. Then I hit send and closed the thread forever. Later that week, James stopped by my desk, holding 2 coffees. You look lighter, he said. Like someone who finally cleaned out a storage unit she's been avoiding for years. I laughed. Something like that. He handed me a cup. How's the cabin project? I've started sketching. It's weird, in the best way. Building something for myself. James nodded thoughtfully. You know, I've worked with enough designers to know when someone's creating from obligation versus passion. You're clearly in the second category now. Maybe for the first time, I said. He smiled. Then keep building. The rest will sort itself out. That weekend, I drove back to Oakhurst, my second visit to Independent Ridge. The air grew cooler as I climbed, the pines thicker, the world quieter. When I parked in front of the cabin, a small gust of wind carried the scent of rain and earth. Sandra waved from her truck. You came back. I couldn't stay away, I admitted. She grinned. Wait till you see it in this light. We walked through the property, the sun breaking through clouds, dappling the hillside with gold. The cabin was simple, still unfurnished, but it felt alive. This is your space, Sandra said, her tone gentle. You'd be surprised how many people buy places like this trying to escape something. But you're here to start something. I smiled. That's exactly it. Which was no days in them. Which was no days in them. I stayed longer than planned. Sat on the porch steps until the shadows stretched long across the ridge. Somewhere below, the faint hum of a highway whispered that life went on. No matter who tried to hold you back. Before leaving, I stood at the edge of the property and looked out at the mountains. I did it, I whispered. Not to anyone, just to the wind. And maybe, for the first time, I believed it. When I got home that night, there were 6 missed calls from my mother, and 1 voicemail. Her voice sounded different, tired, but careful. Clarissa, we heard about Dominic's investors pulling out. Your father's furious, but he'll calm down. I wanted to say we love you. Please don't let money come between us. Cut. I replayed the message once, twice. There it was again, the quiet manipulation hidden under affection. Don't let money come between us. As if I'd been the one who brought money to the table. I deleted the voicemail and, for the first time, didn't feel guilty. A few days later, my grandmother called. Unlike the others, she didn't start with pretense. I won't take much of your time, dear, she said. But I wanted you to know. I saw what you did. And I'm proud. The words caught me off guard. Proud? Yes, she said softly. Your father has always been a product of his generation. He thinks strength means control. But you've shown something different, strength with grace. It's not something this family has seen in a while. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Thank you, Grandma. Just promise me one thing, she said. Don't let bitterness take root where the vineyard used to be in your heart. Let it be fallow land, not poisoned soil. Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. Weeks passed. The vineyard's name began to fade from local headlines. Dominic's expansion project quietly dissolved. Rumors swirled that he'd sold part of the estate to cover debts. My parents kept to themselves. And me? I poured everything into my work and into the cabin. Every weekend, I drove up to Independent Ridge, hauling tools and materials, sketching layouts, breathing mountain air that tasted like new beginnings. Sometimes, I'd stand on the deck with coffee in hand and imagine what the next chapter might hold, not defined by family legacy, but by my own. The sound of the wind through the pines became my new anthem. Freedom didn't roar. It whispered. On a late November morning, I got an email from Elaine. Subject: Project Expansion Opportunity. Clarissa, corporate loved your latest design. They want you to lead a new sustainability division next quarter. Salary increase, and creative autonomy. Let's talk Monday. I stared at the screen, heart hammering. A promotion, one that wasn't handed to me out of obligation, but earned through grit, resilience, and the same stubbornness my family had once called selfish. I smiled. This time, no one else's name would be attached to my success. That weekend, I drove to the cabin again, armed with blueprints and paint swatches. As I climbed the ridge, clouds rolled in gray and heavy. The promise of rain in the air. When I reached the clearing, I stood there a long time, watching the horizon blur between sky and mountain. Somewhere behind me, my phone buzzed. A new message from Dominic. Clarissa, I sold my share of the vineyard. I'm leaving the valley for a while. You were right. About everything. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then I typed back 2 words. Take care. And that was that. That night, the rain came hard and fast, a cleansing storm. I sat by the cabin window, the fire crackling, a notebook open on my lap. Under "to build," I wrote 3 words. Life. Not legacy. And for the first time, the page didn't feel empty. Winter settled in quietly. The kind that turns vineyards silver and the air sharp with frost. By December, I'd fallen into a rhythm, weekdays filled with work and design deadlines, weekends spent on Independent Ridge with my tool belt and thermos of coffee. There was a peace in the routine. No more late-night phone calls from family. No more emotional ambushes disguised as reunions. Just work. Just quiet. Still, some nights, when the sky outside my apartment window glowed faintly with city haze, I found myself thinking of home, not with longing, but with curiosity. What had become of the vineyard? I didn't have to wonder for long. The call came one Monday afternoon from Aunt Martha. Clarissa, dear, she said softly. I hope you don't mind me calling. I know things have been difficult. Her voice carried that fragile politeness older relatives use when tiptoeing around family fractures. I don't mind, I said. There was a pause. It's about your parents. The bank finally called in the note on the vineyard loan. They'll have to sell part of the estate to cover the debt. I sat back in my chair, the words settling like dust. How are they taking it? Your father's quieter than I've ever seen him, she said. Your mother too. Dominic hasn't been around much. I thanked her for letting me know. After we hung up, I stared at my computer screen at the half-finished design for a sustainable office building in Seattle. Somewhere, an entire family legacy was unraveling. And yet, I didn't feel anger or triumph, just a deep, steady calm, because for the first time, their chaos wasn't mine to carry. 2 weeks later, I received a letter, handwritten, in my father's distinct measured cursive. Clarissa, we've sold part of the lower vineyard. It was either that or lose the entire property. Dominic is moving to Oregon to start over. Your mother has been unwell stress. Mostly. I suppose I owe you an apology, though I don't know where to start. Maybe I just needed to say that your mother and I were proud of you. Even if we didn't show it properly. The house feels too quiet now. The vines will rest this winter. Perhaps that's what we all need. Dad. I read it twice, then set it down beside the empty coffee cup on my desk. Apology wasn't the right word for what it was. It was more like recognition, late, small, but real, and that was enough. By January, Independent Ridge was blanketed in snow. I spent my weekends hauling firewood and installing insulation, laughing when my fingers went numb and the hammer slipped from my grip. One Saturday, James drove up to help. "You're seriously doing this alone?" he asked, brushing snow off his jacket as we unloaded supplies. "I told you, I like learning by doing." "Yeah, but this is next-level DIY therapy," he teased, grinning. "What are you building here, a retreat or a statement?" I smiled, tightening the scarf around my neck. "Maybe both." We spent the day working in silence, broken only by the sound of saws and the occasional curse when a nail bent the wrong way. At sunset, we stood on the deck, watching the valley fade into gold and shadow. James handed me a thermos. "You know," he said, "I think you were always supposed to build something that didn't need anyone else's permission. They sarve they were graft in the sames. What is a word to help and serve near?" I took a sip of the hot coffee, the steam clouding between us. "Maybe that's what this is." He nodded. "Then it's perfect." In February, I drove back to the valley, not for a reunion. Not for obligation, just closure. The vines were bare, their tendrils black against the pale sky. A cold wind swept through the fields, carrying the faint smell of earth and oak. When I reached the tasting room, the parking lot was empty. The door, for once, was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old memories. The long oak table, the same one where I'd once faced my entire family, stood bare except for a few unopened mail envelopes and a half-empty wine glass. I ran my fingers over the wood, tracing the grooves, the scratches, the history. This was the table where they'd asked for my money, where they'd told me I was selfish, where I'd finally said no. And somehow, standing there again, I didn't feel bitterness, only gratitude, because that moment, that breaking point, had given me everything I'd been too afraid to take before. My voice. My autonomy. My life. I walked out to the porch overlooking the vineyard. The hills rolled out like a faded painting, dotted with remnants of harvest crates and dormant vines. For decades, my family had built their identity on this land, a legacy wrapped in pride and debt and expectation, and now, it was quiet, almost peaceful. I took one last look at the fields, the house, the sign with our name fading in the winter light. Then I turned back toward my car. As I drove away, the vineyard disappeared in the rearview mirror, smaller, then smaller still, until it was just a blur on the horizon. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just breathed. Back at the cabin, the snow had begun to melt. Tiny streams trickled down the hillside, glinting in the sunday. I grabbed my sketchbook and drew the vineyard one last time, not as it was, but as I wanted to remember it. Soft light, steady rows, no people. Just quiet land resting after too many years of expectation. At the bottom of the page, I wrote 3 words. Let the soil rest. By spring, things had shifted in small, steady ways. The sustainability division I'd been offered at Westbrook took off faster than anyone expected. James became my co-lead on the project. We worked late most nights, but the exhaustion was a different kind of tired, purposeful, creative, alive. And on weekends, I returned to Independent Ridge. The cabin was finished now, polished floors, cedar walls, the faint scent of pine smoke and paint. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch with a glass of wine, not Matthews Reserve, just something light from the local shop, and watch the sky turn pink over the mountains. The kind of peace that doesn't need permission. A letter arrived in early April, from my mother this time. Clarissa, we visited the vineyard today. It's smaller now, but still beautiful. I thought about you. Your father says the vines will come back stronger after the frost. I hope you will. 2. There's a bottle here for you from the last harvest before the sale. Come by anytime. Love, Mom. I folded the letter, smiled, and tucked it into the drawer of my writing desk. I didn't know if I'd ever go back again, but the invitation, simple and unpressured, was enough. Sometimes, healing isn't a door you walk through, it's a window you finally open. That evening, I sat outside under the stars, notebook open on my lap. The air smelled like cedar and rain. I wrote, I used to think freedom meant distance from people, from pain, from the past. But maybe freedom is just the moment you realize you can love something, and still walk away from it. I closed the notebook and smiled. The wind moved through the pines, soft and unhurried, and somewhere far below, the old vineyard slept beneath the moonlight, resting, forgiving, letting go. Spring arrived early that year. The snow on Independent Ridge melted into rivers that shimmered like veins of light across the hillside, feeding wildflowers that hadn't bloomed in years. I stood on the cabin porch one morning, coffee steaming in my hands, and watched the earth awaken. It was quiet, but not empty. The kind of quiet that feels full, alive. The last few months had taught me something simple yet profound. Rebuilding doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes, it's just showing up every morning to a life you finally chose. At Westbrook Design, the new sustainability division was taking shape faster than anyone predicted. Elaine had appointed me as lead architect, with James as project manager. Together, we were tasked with redefining what green design meant, not just in aesthetics, but in philosophy. Our first big assignment was a winery project in Oregon. Ironic, really. The client, a young couple named Nora and Evan, wanted a vineyard that focused on soil regeneration and fair wage labor instead of luxury tourism. During the first video call, Nora smiled warmly. "We don't want it to be a status symbol," she said. "We want it to heal the land." Something in me shifted. That line, "heal the land," stayed echoing long after the call ended. That night, I walked through the cabin with my sketchbook, thinking about her words, heal the land. For years, I'd thought of the vineyard as something that took my time, my peace, my identity. But maybe, in its own way, it had also taught me how to give back. Because design, at its best, was never about ego. It was about stewardship, leaving something stronger than you found it. I sat by the fireplace and began sketching a design for Nora and Evan's project: open-air terraces, solar rooftops, irrigation systems powered by rainfall. No grandeur, no marble tasting rooms, just balance. It felt good, like setting roots in new soil. A few weeks later, James stopped by my office holding 2 mugs of coffee, one already half empty. "Guess what?" he said. "The Oregon clients loved your design." "Really?" "They called it a vineyard that breathes." I laughed, shaking my head. "That might be the best compliment I've ever gotten." He grinned. "You know, Clarissa, I think you've turned your story into your strength." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "You took everything your family tried to use against you, your independence, your caution, your refusal to compromise, and made it your trademark. You designed your own way forward." One of the elected bodies. For a moment, I didn't say anything, because he was right. The same traits my father had called selfish were now the foundation of my career and my peace. By May, Independent Ridge was in full bloom. The cabin stood finished, sunlight spilling across its cedar walls, the deck wrapped in flowering vines I'd planted in late March. One Saturday, I hosted a small gathering, my first real one. James came, of course, along with Elaine and a few close colleagues from Westbrook. We grilled vegetables, opened bottles of local wine, and watched the sunset paint the sky. At one point, Elaine turned to me and said, "This place feels like it was designed to forgive." I smiled. Maybe that's what I needed it to do. A few days later, I got another letter. This time, from my grandmother. "My dearest Clarissa, your mother told me you built your own home. I knew you would. When your father and I first planted the vineyard, I told him the vines would teach us patience, that some things take seasons to grow. He didn't always listen. But I hope you do. Family roots can twist, but they can also hold fast. I am proud of you, not because of what you've done, but because of how you've done it. With grace. With courage. That's the kind of legacy that lasts. Love always. Grandma Helen." Her words made me cry quietly, unexpectedly. Not the kind of tears that sting, but the kind that wash something clean. In late June, Nora and Evan invited me to visit their completed vineyard. It was small, nestled in the Oregon hills, but breathtaking. Instead of a grand estate, the tasting area was built from reclaimed wood and glass, with walls that opened fully to the fields. Workers moved easily between rows of vines, laughing, talking, alive. Nora met me near the entrance. "It's everything we dreamed of," she said, eyes shining. "And your design made it possible." I looked around the solar panels, the composting gardens, the natural pond that doubled as irrigation, and felt a rush of quiet pride. "This isn't just my design," I said softly. "It's yours too. It's everyone's." She smiled. "That's the point." As I walked through the vineyard, I thought of my family's land back in California, tired, overworked, drowning in debt. And for the first time, the thought didn't hurt, because I was standing in proof that something new could grow from the same soil. That night, I drove back to my hotel and opened my notebook. At the top of a fresh page I wrote, "Healing isn't about erasing what broke you, it's about building where the cracks let the light in." Below it, I began sketching again, not a building this time, but something simpler. A tree, strong trunk, Deep roots, wide branches reaching for light. For years, I'd been afraid that walking away from my family meant losing my roots, but maybe, leaving had allowed them to finally grow. A few weeks later, while reviewing a new project at work, I got an email from my father. Short, honest. I heard about your work in Oregon. You made something good. I hope one day you'll come see what's left of the vineyard. It's smaller, but your mother planted wildflowers where the lower vines used to be. She said it was time to let the ground rest. Wildflowers. I closed my eyes and smiled. Even the land was learning to start over. That weekend, I drove back to Independent Ridge. The cabin glowed under a pale summer moon, the deck warm under my bare feet. I stood there a long time, listening to the sound of wind moving through pine branches. The world below the vineyard, the valley, the city, all felt far away, but not lost. Every story, I realized, doesn't end where it began. Some just grow in a different direction. I took one last sip of wine, whispered a quiet, "Thank you" to the mountains, and turned out the light. The stars outside blinked like tiny witnesses. The vineyard had been my past. Independent Ridge was my peace. And everything after this, everything still waiting, was my future. 5 years later, the valley called me back. It wasn't the vineyard that drew me, it was my grandmother. When the phone rang that morning, I knew before answering. Some silences you can recognize even through a dial tone. She passed peacefully, Aunt Martha said. In her sleep. The service is next Saturday, at the vineyard. She always said she wanted her ashes scattered among the vines. For a moment, the world stilled. The cabin around me, sunlight, cedar scent, gentle hum of wind blurred into quiet. I'd known this day would come. Still, the news rooted itself deep. The kind of ache that doesn't ask for tears right away. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring out at Independent Ridge. The wildflowers I'd planted years ago were blooming again, soft purple and white, bending gently in the wind. Life goes on, Grandma had always said. Even when we're not looking. I hadn't been back to the vineyard in years. When I finally turned off the highway and saw the familiar sign, Matthews Family Vineyards, the paint was faded. The wood slightly warped, but below it, a new sign had been added. Now managed by the Sierra Valley Cooperative, Sustainable Farming for the Future. I smiled softly. The land had found a new caretaker. Driving through the gates, I noticed things that had changed: solar panels on the barn roof, a smaller tasting area, new irrigation lines, and things that hadn't. The rolling hills, the sturdy oaks, the sunlight lying golden on the vines. But the biggest change was silence. A good silence. The kind that comes after a storm. The service was small, just family, close friends, and a few workers who'd been with the vineyard since my childhood. We gathered under the oldest oak tree, its branches casting a wide, forgiving shadow. My mother stood near the front, her hands clasped around a folded handkerchief. My father stood beside her, thinner now, quieter. When our eyes met, there was no anger. Just time. A minister spoke a few words about legacy and love, about vines that rest and bloom again, and then, one by one, we each took a handful of ashes and scattered them into the soil. When it was my turn, I knelt down. The earth cool beneath my fingers. "Thank you," I whispered, "for teaching me to let things rest." The ashes drifted between the vines, caught the sunlight, and disappeared into the ground. After the service, people lingered talking, sharing old stories. My mother approached slowly, as if testing the ground between us. "You came," she said softly. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied. She looked down, twisting her handkerchief. "Your grandmother was proud of you. She told everyone about your projects. The sustainable vineyards, the cabins, the schools." I smiled faintly. "She wrote me letters. I kept them all." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "Your father and I, we didn't handle things well. With you. With the vineyard. We were so afraid of losing everything. We didn't realize we were losing you first." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind moved gently through the vines. "I think we all did what we thought we had to," I said finally. "We just forgot what mattered most." She nodded, eyes glistening. "Your father wanted to talk to you, but he thought you wouldn't come." "I'm here," I said simply, and that was enough. Later, as the crowd thinned, I wandered through the rows alone. Half the vineyard had been replanted, not with grapes, but with wildflowers. Poppies, lupines, daisies, color spilling like a second sunrise across the hills. At the far edge stood my father. He was leaning against a post, watching the wind ripple through the flowers. For a long moment, we didn't speak. Then he said quietly, "Your grandmother loved this view." I nodded. "She did." He sighed, slow and weary. "You were right, Clarissa. About everything. The debt, the pride, the way we treated you. I see that now." It wasn't a dramatic confession, just truth, plain and unadorned. "I appreciate that," I said. He glanced at me, his eyes tired but honest. The cooperative offered to name a new section after her. Helen's Field. Your mother suggested they plant wildflowers instead of vines. I smiled. That sounds right. He nodded, looking out again. She'd have liked what you built, that cabin of yours. I laughed softly. It's more modest than the vineyard ever was. Maybe that's why it works, he said. Before I left, I stopped at the main house, smaller now, quieter. The walls lined with old photos. On the mantel sat a framed picture I'd never seen before. My grandmother, younger, standing beside the first row of vines, and next to her, a little girl holding a small potted grapevine, smiling awkwardly at the camera. Me. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't remember the photo being taken, but I remembered the moment, the feel of dirt under my nails, my grandmother's hand guiding mine as we pressed the roots into the ground. Every vine starts small, she'd said. You don't force it to grow. You give it space, light, and time. I reached out, tracing the frame's edge with my fingertips. Time had given me all three. That evening, I drove back toward the mountains. The road curved between fields of gold and green, the last light fading behind the ridges. When I reached Independent Ridge, the cabin glowed softly against the dark, my own small beacon of peace. I stepped out of the car, carrying a single cutting from the vineyard, a small grapevine I'd taken with my mother's quiet blessing. Behind the cabin, the earth was rich and damp from the morning rain. I knelt, dug a small hole, and placed the vine inside. It wasn't about wine. It wasn't about legacy. It was about remembering not what I'd lost, but what had shaped me. When I finished, I pressed the soil down gently and whispered, "For her, for all of us." The stars came out one by one, scattered across the sky like the seeds of something still growing. Inside, I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the small vine sway in the breeze. Maybe it would take. Maybe it wouldn't, but that wasn't the point anymore. Because some roots are planted not to reclaim the past but to remind us that healing can grow anywhere, even in new soil. 10 years had passed since the day I planted that small vine behind the cabin. Most days, I forgot it was there until spring came and it reminded me. The vine had survived the winters, the storms, the long stretches of heat. It wasn't lush or showy, but every year, it returned stronger, steadier, its green leaves curling toward the Sunday. Sometimes I caught myself standing on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching it sway in the mountain wind and thinking, you and I, we did all right. The vineyard in the valley had changed too. Through articles and photos shared online, I'd seen what the Sierra Valley Cooperative had done with it. The tasting rooms were smaller now, built from reclaimed wood and glass. The new owners had kept a single plaque from the original estate, Helen's Field, where growth and rest share the same soil. The wildflowers still bloomed between the vines, bright and unapologetic. At Westbrook, I'd built more than a career, I'd built a purpose. Our sustainability division had grown into a full foundation, funding community-driven architecture across rural regions. And somewhere along the way, I'd found myself becoming what I never expected, a mentor. One morning, a young architect named Leah knocked on my office door, clutching a sketchbook and a nervous smile. "Miss Matthews? I've followed your work for years. You make design feel like storytelling. Can I show you something?" "Matthews? Please," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. She opened her book, revealing sketches of a small community space, clean lines, open courtyards, sunlight spilling across recycled stone. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "What's your vision for it?" She hesitated. "It's for my hometown. It used to be a farming village, but after the drought, most people left. I want to build something that brings them back, something that reminds them they still belong." I smiled, the words hitting somewhere deep. "You're not just designing a building, Leah. You're rebuilding faith. And that's where architecture begins, not with walls, but with what they hold." Her eyes brightened. "That's exactly how I feel." "Then follow it," I said. "Don't let anyone tell you what you can't build, especially if it comes from people who never had to fight for what you're fighting for." Leah nodded, scribbling notes as if each word mattered. Maybe it did. Because once, I had needed to hear the same thing. Later that evening, after everyone left the office, I lingered by the window. The city lights below pulsed like a heartbeat, a rhythm of progress, of lives intersecting and diverging. I thought of the vineyard, of Independent Ridge, of the long path that had taken me from trying to earn approval to simply living on my own terms. Every life, I realized, is a kind of design, an imperfect draft we keep redrawing until it finally feels like home. That weekend, I drove back to the cabin. The mountains looked softer in the summer light, their peaks still streaked with snow. When I stepped onto the porch, the scent of pine hit me like a welcome. I walked around back to where the vine had taken root. It was taller now, climbing the wooden trellis I'd built years ago. Small clusters of green fruit hanging like quiet promises. I touched one of the leaves, tracing its veins. You kept growing, I whispered. Even when no one was watching. It is one is Dakin. It was a simple thing, a vine, alive and steady, but it carried the whole story. The years of trying, the breaking, the rebuilding, all of it here, in something that just kept reaching for light. That evening, James visited. He'd moved to Oregon years ago but still stopped by whenever he was in California. He leaned on the porch, railing beside me, holding a mug of tea. You know, he said, this place still feels like peace in physical form. I laughed softly. That's exactly what I built it for. He glanced toward the small vine. It's bigger. Yeah, I said, smiling. Didn't expect it to live this long. And the say presness, and there are words to rating. He looked at me, then back at the horizon. Funny how the things we plant when we're hurting end up being the ones that last. We stood there in silence for a while, the mountains blushing under the setting Sunday. After a moment, he said, Elaine's retiring next year. They're naming the foundation after you. I turned to him, startled. What? He grinned. The Matthews Initiative for Sustainable Design and Ethical Development. Elaine says it's fitting. You built the culture she always wanted the firm to have. For a long time, I didn't speak. My throat felt tight, my heart full. I didn't build it alone, I said quietly. No, James said, smiling. But you made us believe we could. The one of the best, records degradant. With a challenge, red of her workman's oath. That night, I wrote my final note to my grandmother, one I'd never send but needed to write. Dear Grandma, you were right about the vines. They don't grow on control. They grow on care. I used to think legacy meant inheritance, but now I think it means impact. You left yours in the soil. I'm trying to leave mine in people. There's a small vine here on the ridge that's taken root, one you'd love. It doesn't bear much fruit, but it reminds me that growth doesn't always have to be grand to be good. Sometimes, it just has to keep going. Love. Always. Clarissa. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it between the pages of her old vineyard journal, the one she'd given me years ago. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of earth and rain. I took it as a sign. Months passed. Leah's community center was approved, fully funded through the Matthews Initiative. At the groundbreaking, she asked me to speak. I stood before the small crowd, builders, families, children holding shovels too big for their hands, and said, design is about faith, not in ourselves, but in what can grow after we leave. Because one day, someone will walk through these doors, sit in this courtyard, or touch these walls, and feel safe, and that, to me, is the real foundation of any legacy. Applause rippled softly through the crowd, carried by the wind. Somewhere, I thought, Grandma was smiling. That evening, back on Independent Ridge, I poured a glass of wine, one made from the cooperative's first organic harvest. The label read, Helen's Field Reserve, 100% sustainable, 100% family. I sat on the deck, watching the stars appear one by one. When I took the first sip, I laughed. It wasn't perfect. A little dry, a little tart, but it was honest. And somehow, that made it the best wine I'd ever tasted. I looked out at the small vine, now catching the starlight, its leaves glowing faintly in the dark. Once, I'd thought my story was about walking away, but maybe, it had always been about growing into who I was meant to be without apology, without fear. The vineyard, the cabin, the work, they were all connected. Branches from the same root. Love, integrity, renewal. As the night deepened, I whispered one last thing into the quiet. May everything I build outlive me, and may it all be kind. In Crichton wise. The wind moved softly through the leaves, as if answering back, and for the first time in a long, long while, I felt not just peace, but belonging. 20 years later, the cabin still stood on Independent Ridge. It looked a little older now, the cedar walls weathered to a silvery gray, the deck softened by years of mountain wind. But the foundation was solid, the structure sound. It had aged the way good things should. Quietly, gracefully, without losing its warmth. Inside, the light came through the same tall windows I'd once drawn on tracing paper. It fell across the floorboards in golden strips, touching the familiar things, the books on the shelf, the sketches on the wall, the old mug with paint stains from too many late nights. And on the back porch, still climbing the same wooden trellis, was the vine. It had grown thick now, curling like a living memory. Some years, it bore fruit. Some years, it didn't. But it had never died. I smiled at it the way you smile at an old friend who's seen every version of you and stayed anyway. I was 71 that summer, still designing, though more in guidance than in blueprints. The Matthews Initiative had grown beyond anything I imagined. Scholarships for young architects, community building projects across rural America, mentorship programs in sustainability. Leah now, Dr. Leah Morales, ran it with the same fire she'd brought into my office all those years ago. Every time she sent an update, a new project, a groundbreaking, A letter from a student. I felt that same quiet joy. The knowledge that something I'd built was still building others. That was the part no one tells you about legacy. It isn't about being remembered. It's about what keeps growing when you're gone. One afternoon, I received a package. Inside was a bottle of wine, wrapped carefully in paper. The label read, Independent Ridge Blend in partnership with Helen's Field Cooperative. Underneath it, a note in Leah's handwriting. For the woman who taught me that growth and grace aren't opposites. We thought you'd like to taste what your two worlds created together. I stared at it for a long time. The name, the blend, the thoughtfulness of it. Then I poured a glass and carried it out to the porch. The first sip was smooth and warm, earth and sun and history woven together. It tasted like closure. It tasted like peace. That evening, as the sky turned to lavender, I opened my grandmother's old vineyard journal, the one with her notes, her pressed leaves, her sketches of vines. On the final page, I wrote my own entry. I used to think success meant being seen, but it really means being steady. The land taught me that. The people I loved taught me that. Every vine, every wall, every quiet act of creation, they're all proof that care outlasts pride. And that's the only legacy worth leaving. I closed the journal, placed it on the shelf by the window, and turned toward the door. That night, the wind carried the smell of rain, the kind that comes gently, like a blessing. I stepped outside one last time. The moon hung low over the ridge, bathing everything in soft light. The vine shimmered, tiny droplets of dew already forming on its leaves. I thought of Grandma Helen, of my parents, of Dominic somewhere out there in the world, hopefully at peace. Every life had its harvests and its winters. But if you stayed kind, if you stayed true, something good always grew again. Before I went inside, I left a small envelope pinned to the porch post, for whoever might find the cabin one day. Inside, a letter, to whoever comes after me. Welcome to Independent Ridge. If you're reading this, then this place has found you. The way it once found me. You don't need to fix it, or make it grand. Just live honestly within it. Listen to the wind. Watch how the light changes. And remember that everything alive, vines, people, dreams, needs both roots and rest. You don't have to chase legacy. Just live with care, and legacy will follow. Clarissa Matthews. Years later, long after I was gone, the cabin would become part of the Matthews Learning Retreat. A small, quiet center, where young architects came to study sustainable design and nature. Leah made sure the letter stayed on the porch, framed behind glass. Visitors often read it aloud at sunset, as the mountains caught the last glow of day. And behind the cabin, the vine still grew, twisting. Patient, eternal. Every spring, it bloomed. Every autumn, it rested. A rhythm as steady as a heartbeat, whispering to anyone who stopped long enough to listen. Care. Create. Continue. If you stood on the ridge at dusk, you could still see the valley below the vineyards, the wildflowers, the lights of a world that never stopped turning. And if you looked closely, you might notice something shining faintly in the breeze, a small silver plaque nailed to the cabin wall. In memory of Clarissa Matthews, who chose to build light, not walls. Somewhere in that same wind, her words still lingered. Soft, certain, and alive. May everything I build outlive me, and may it all be kind.